Rain hammered the cracked pavement as Samantha Reyes pulled her coat tighter, the thin fabric doing little against the icy wind. Her shoes squelched with every step, soaked through hours ago during her long shift at the diner. In her hand, she clutched a small styrofoam box, leftover fries, and a half-eaten grilled cheese. The only thing she could afford to bring home. Her daughter, Lena, would be waiting, stomach empty, cheeks flushed with hope at the sound of the key turning in the lock. Samantha walked faster, the cold gnawing at her bones, fatigue dragging at her limbs. As she rounded the corner by the store, she saw him, a man huddled under the awning, rain pouring off his shoulders, barefoot, clothes clinging to his thin frame. He didn't look up, didn't beg or speak, just sat there, silent and soaked. Shivering violently, Samantha hesitated. Every instinct told her to keep walking. She had a child to feed, but something in her, maybe the same ache she saw in his eyes, the raw vulnerability, made her stop. She glanced at the box, then stepped toward him and held it out. "Here," she said softly. He looked up, startled. "Ma'am, are you sure?" She nodded once, gave a faint, tired smile, and continued walking, never looking back. The next morning, Samantha opened her door to the flashing red-blue strobe of police cruisers. 2 uniformed officers stood by the curb, hands on their belts, eyes unreadable. But it was the man in front of them who made her breath catch, the same man from the night before. Only now he was clean-shaven, dry, and sharply dressed in a tailored suit. His shoes gleamed. A silver badge hung from a lanyard around his neck. Samantha's heart pounded. She gripped the doorframe. "What's going on?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. The man stepped forward, eyes locked with hers, and said quietly, "We need to talk." Samantha Reyes lived in the kind of exhaustion that settled deep into the bones, not just from lack of sleep, but from years of trying and failing to catch her breath. At 32, her life bore the quiet scars of survival. 2 years ago, her husband Derek walked out, trading their crumbling apartment and 7 years of marriage for a younger woman and a fresh start, leaving Samantha with nothing but a trail of unpaid bills and a daughter who still asked when Daddy was coming back. Since then, Samantha had been treading water, working 2 dead-end jobs, cleaning rooms at a mid-tier hotel during the day, and wiping down greasy diner tables. At night, barely scraping enough together to keep the lights on. Each morning brought fresh dread, the hum of past due notices stacking up, the rattle of Lena's persistent cough, the gnawing question of what else she could sell or skip to get through one more week. Her mother, once her source of comfort, had grown cold and distant since the divorce, quick to offer blame instead of support. "You pushed him away," she'd said once, her voice sharp with disapproval. Since then, Samantha had stopped reaching out down. Now every part of her life felt like a battlefield. Her boss at the hotel barking orders like she was invisible. Lena's school sending home reminders about unpaid lunch balances. The quiet ache of hunger dulling her senses more days than not. And yet, through all of it, Samantha held on, not with fanfare or bitterness, but with a quiet, worn-out kind of courage. She still tucked Lena in every night, reading her the same picture book about a flying cat, putting on a brave smile even when her voice cracked from the tears she saved until after bedtime. She laughed when she could, danced in the living room, on better days, and told Lena everything would be okay, even when she didn't believe it herself. That morning, an eviction notice flapped against their front door, soaked from the rain. The words "final warning" were circled in red ink. She stood there for a moment, box of fries long gone, stomach tight with hunger, and something else, shame, maybe, or despair, before peeling it off, and walking inside like nothing had changed. The man from last night had been a passing shadow, just another body lost in the city's edges. Samantha hadn't helped him to be a hero. She hadn't even thought about it, really. It was instinct, Or maybe something deeper that made her stop, that made her hand over her last meal without asking his name. He hadn't begged, hadn't said a word, but something in the way he sat, soaked and silent, reminded her too much of her own reflection. She never expected to see him again, certainly not in front of her home the next morning, cleaned up and commanding, flanked by cops and carrying a badge. Now, standing in the doorway in her threadbare sweater, she watched him with a mix of fear and disbelief. Her mind raced. Had she done something wrong? Was he a cop, a victim, a trick? The memory of his shaking hands reaching for her food still clung to her, but now those same hands looked firm, decisive, steady, and for the first time in what felt like forever, someone was standing at her door, not to take something from her, but to deliver something. Something she didn't understand, yet Samantha stood frozen in the doorway, the smell of wet pavement still clinging to the air, as the man from last night, no longer barefoot and trembling, but crisp and composed in a tailored suit, introduced himself. "Marcus Taylor," he said, his voice steady but not unkind. "Federal agent, undercover." She blinked, unsure whether she'd heard him right. Marcus went on, explaining how he'd been embedded in a long-running surveillance operation targeting a human trafficking ring that had taken root in the city's underbelly. Posing as a homeless man was part of the cover, unnecessary risk. But something had gone wrong the night before. His backup delayed, his comms jammed, and he'd been vulnerable, exposed. "You showing up with that food," he said quietly, "that threw off someone who'd been tailing me. Made it look like I had protection. You may have saved my life." Samantha gripped the edge of the door tighter. "I didn't do anything," she murmured, but Marcus shook his head. "You fed a federal agent with your last meal. That doesn't go unnoticed." The words didn't feel real. Samantha had spent years fading into the background. The ignored cleaning woman, the overdrawn account holder, the mother no one stepped up for. Now this man, this stranger, was offering her something that sounded dangerously close to a lifeline. He explained the opportunity, a temporary position at the agency's local office. Nothing covert or dangerous, just administrative work, filing, answering phones, scheduling logistics. It paid triple what she made cleaning hotel rooms, and came with real health benefits. The kind that meant Lena could finally see a doctor without them asking for money up front. Samantha felt her stomach twist. It sounded too good to be true. She crossed her arms, her voice low. "Why me? What's the catch?" Marcus didn't flinch. "There's no catch. I know how rare it is for someone to do the right thing when they've got nothing. You did. I have pull, and I want to use it for someone who deserves a break." Still, when he left, she couldn't stop pacing. Her instinct told her to be cautious. She had trusted people before Derek, who'd promised forever before leaving her with a mountain of debt and a daughter too young to understand betrayal. Her mother, who'd once been her protector but now only looked at her with disappointment. That night, as rain began to fall again, Lena started coughing. It was deeper this time, wetter, and came with a small, frightened wheeze. Samantha wrapped her in a blanket and rushed to the ER, praying they'd see her without upfront payment. But at the front desk, the woman behind the glass didn't even look up after hearing Samantha's insurance status. "We can't admit her without a deposit," she said flatly. Samantha pleaded, tears pushing at the edges of her voice. But it didn't matter. In that moment, sitting in the corner of a cold emergency room, her daughter's head on her lap, and the weight of helplessness crushing her, she did the unthinkable. She called Marcus. He answered on the second ring. "Is the offer still good?" she asked, her voice barely holding together. "It is," he replied, without hesitation. The next morning, she walked into the federal building wearing her only clean blouse, hand gripping her worn purse like armor. A receptionist smiled and led her back. For the first time in years, Samantha Reyes was stepping into something new, not without fear, but with something deeper flickering behind it. A fragile hope. Samantha stepped into her new role at the federal office with a mixture of gratitude and quiet terror. The building felt too clean, too official, like a place she didn't belong. The fluorescent lights buzzed above her as she stumbled over paperwork, protocols, and email chains, fumbling with acronyms she'd never heard before. But slowly, bit by bit, she began to find her rhythm. She showed up early, stayed late, doubled everything. She wasn't flashy, wasn't fast, but she was thorough, and she cared. And people noticed. Marcus, in particular, became a constant presence, a steady calm in the chaos. He didn't hover or patronize, but he'd leave helpful notes on her desk or gently correct a misfiled document without judgment. They shared lunches sometimes, quiet conversations over microwaved leftovers and paper cups of coffee. There wasn't romance, not yet, but there was something, a growing trust, an unspoken bond built on the strange beginning they shared. But just as Samantha began to believe she might finally be building something stable, the past came crashing through the door in the form of Derek. He showed up unannounced one afternoon, leaning against her building with a smug grin and a manila envelope in hand. "Heard you're with the feds now," he said, voice slick with mock admiration. "Guess I should congratulate you." Samantha stiffened. She could smell the trouble on him before he even spoke the words. He was filing for full custody of Lena, claimed he wanted to be a father again. But Samantha knew better. He didn't care about bedtime stories or doctor's visits. He wanted control, leverage. He saw her rising, and like always, he was there to drag her back down. She tried to reason with him, begged him not to do this to Lena, but he laughed it off, told her she'd had her turn. The papers came 2 days later. Derek had hired an aggressive lawyer, the kind who knew how to twist a struggling mother's story into negligence. They cited everything, the eviction notice, the long work hours, even her job at the federal office, framing it as too demanding, too dangerous. Samantha sat in stunned silence as her attorney explained the mounting case against her, her throat dry, her hands trembling. Then came the final blow. Her own mother agreed to testify on Derek's behalf. Said Samantha had always been too proud, that she never learnt to listen, and should have let Derek lead. The betrayal cut deeper than any court motion. Her mother hadn't just turned her back. She'd handed Samantha's worst fears to the enemy on a silver platter. Alone again, Samantha began to unravel. Her work started to slip. Small mistakes, missed deadlines. At night, Lena would ask if she had done something wrong, and Samantha would lie, smile, and tell her everything was fine, even as her chest caved in under the weight of the lies. Marcus noticed the change, the shadows under her eyes, the silence that replaced their usual coffee chats. He tried to reach out, asked if she was okay, but she pushed him away. One night, after a particularly brutal day in court, where Derek's lawyer had painted her as unstable and selfish, Marcus stopped her in the hallway, gently placing a hand on her arm. "You don't have to go through this alone," he said. Samantha jerked away, voice breaking under the strain. "You don't get it," she snapped. "You don't know what it's like to have everything taken from you, to be treated like you're nothing. You're just doing this because you feel guilty I fed you." The words hung between them like a slap. But Marcus didn't get angry. He didn't retreat. He just looked at her with quiet understanding and said, "I'm doing this because you reminded me what it means to be human." His voice was calm, but it cracked slightly at the edges. "When I was undercover, I lost myself, forgot what I was even fighting for. And then you showed up with nothing in your hands and gave me everything. You didn't know who I was. You just saw a person in pain and didn't look away. I haven't forgotten that." Samantha's eyes filled, but she turned away before he could see the tears fall. The world had taught her not to expect kindness, not without consequence. But maybe, just maybe, Marcus wasn't like the others. Maybe this time, someone was fighting with her instead of against her. Still, as the court date approached and Derek's threats escalated, Samantha felt the old weight settle over her again, that familiar fear that no matter how hard she fought, it would never be enough. The night before the final custody hearing, Marcus found Samantha alone in the office break room, staring into her untouched cup of coffee. The silence between them stretched until he finally spoke, his voice quiet but full of something heavier than usual. "There's something I haven't told you," he said, easing into the chair beside her. "When I said you reminded me what it means to be human, I meant more than just your kindness that night." He paused, eyes distant, searching for the right words. "I grew up in a house a lot like yours. My dad took off when I was 10. My mum worked 2 jobs, sometimes 3. She used to fall asleep with her shoes still on. And I remember being 7 years old, just like Lena, watching her cry when she thought I couldn't hear." His voice faltered. "So when I saw you, tired, soaked, holding that little takeout box, and then you gave it away, I didn't see a random woman. I saw her, and I saw me." He looked at her then, really looked. "You didn't just save my life, Samantha. You reminded me where I came from, why I do this work, why it matters." The walls she had built so carefully around herself cracked a little in that moment, something deep and buried beginning to soften. The courtroom the next day was cold and unforgiving. Derek's lawyer wasted no time painting Samantha as unstable, overwhelmed, and incapable. They brought up her eviction, waved around old medical records noting anxiety and fatigue, and leaned hard on her mother's betrayal, that she was too proud to let anyone help her, that she had always been reckless with responsibility. Samantha sat through it all, silent and still, her hands clenched in her lap as every personal failure was twisted and turned into ammunition against her. But when it was finally her turn, she rose and walked to the stand with steady steps. Her voice, though quiet, carried a quiet conviction. She didn't deny the truth. Yes, she had been evicted. Yes, she had struggled. Yes, there were nights she cried herself to sleep, and mornings she wasn't sure how she'd put food on the table. "But I never left my daughter," she said firmly. "Not once. I worked 3 jobs so she could have shoes that fit, so she could go on school field trips, so she'd never feel like she wasn't worth the effort." Her voice wavered, but she didn't break. "And when I had 1 meal to eat and saw someone hungrier than me, I gave it away. Not because I wanted anything in return, but because I want to raise my daughter to be that kind of person. The kind who helps, even when it hurts." The judge nodded slowly, but it was clear the decision was still hanging in the balance until Marcus stood up from the back of the courtroom and made his way to the front. His presence sent a murmur through the room. It was against regulations, and they both knew it, but he didn't hesitate. "Your Honor," he said, addressing the bench, "I know I'm not listed as a witness, but I'd like to offer a statement, not as a federal agent, as a man whose life was changed by this woman." The judge gave a reluctant nod, and Marcus turned to face the room, his voice carrying more weight than volume. "I met Samantha when I was undercover, posing as homeless. I was cold, hungry, and in danger, and she gave me her last meal, not knowing who I was, not asking for anything in return." He looked directly at Derek then. She was hungry, her daughter was hungry, and still she gave. He turned back to the judge. "If that's not the definition of a good mother, I don't know what is." Silence filled the courtroom. Real silence, the kind that sinks into your skin. Samantha blinked hard, trying to hold back tears. For the first time, in what felt like forever, someone had stood up for her, not because they had to, but because they believed in her. Not because of pity, but respect. The judge scribbled something in his notes, then looked up with unreadable eyes. The decision wouldn't be announced until the following week, But in that moment, Samantha felt a shift. The weight hadn't vanished, but something had changed. She had stood her ground, told her truth, and someone finally had spoken. Up with her instead of against her. And maybe, just maybe, that would be enough. The courtroom was silent as the judge read the verdict, the air so thick with tension that Samantha could barely breathe. Then the words came, full custody granted. To Samantha Reyes, a wave of disbelief hit her before the relief followed, overwhelming and raw. The judge had seen through Derek's facade. His financial records revealed he hadn't paid a cent of child support in years, and his sudden interest in Lena was exposed for what it truly was, a power play, not parental love. The testimony from Marcus had struck a chord not only with the court, but with everyone present. Derek's smugness dissolved in real time, and when he stormed out, no one followed. Samantha sat back in her chair, stunned and shaking, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. For once, she hadn't lost. She'd fought and won in the days that followed. Marcus's courtroom statement, captured on a cell phone by someone in the back row, was posted online and quickly went viral. "If that's not the definition of a good mother, I don't know what is," became a rallying cry, quoted across platforms by parents, advocates, and strangers alike. Messages poured in from people who saw themselves in Samantha, single parents, survivors, underdogs. Non-profit organizations reached out with job offers and housing assistance. A local charity created a scholarship fund in Lena's name. Invitations came for Samantha to speak about resilience and rebuilding after domestic betrayal. She was overwhelmed, but humbled, unsure if she was ready to become anyone's symbol. But for the first time, the world wasn't looking down on her. It was listening. Back at the agency, her temporary position became permanent. The offer came with a full benefits package, a salary she had only dreamed of, and, to her shock, her very own desk. She decorated it with a small photo of Lena, a second-hand mug that read "Just Keep Swimming," and a sticky note with Marcus's handwriting, "You've got this." With her new income, Samantha secured a small apartment in a quiet neighborhood, nothing extravagant, but clean and safe, with a bedroom for Lena and a kitchen where they could cook real meals together. On the first night there, as they unpacked, Lena turned to her and said, "This one feels like it's really ours." And Samantha smiled, because it was. Then came the call from her mother, hesitant, tearful, apologetic, but not quite accountable. She asked to see Lena, said she missed her, that she wanted to fix things. Samantha didn't hang up. She didn't yell. She listened. But when her mother asked, "Can we go back to the way things were?" Samantha replied calmly, "We can't go back, but maybe we can go forward. If you're ready to own what you said and did." It wasn't a door slammed shut, but it wasn't thrown wide open either. It was a boundary, firm, necessary, and long overdue. Samantha Reyes was no longer the woman scraping together tips and pretending not to cry behind locked doors. She still carried the scars, the weight of everything she'd endured, but now she carried something else, to proof that she was stronger than every person who had tried to diminish her, that she could build something lasting, not just for herself, but for Lena, and maybe even for others still fighting their way forward. The morning sun warmed the sidewalk. As Samantha walked Lena to school, their fingers intertwined, the day already glowing with the promise of something new. Lena skipped beside her, laughing at something silly, her backpack bouncing with every step. The world felt lighter now, not perfect, not without weight, but full of breath again. As they neared the old corner store, Samantha slowed. The spot was the same, but the man sitting there now was someone new, hunched, hollow-eyed, wrapped in a worn jacket against a warmth he didn't seem to feel. He didn't ask for anything, just sat there, tired and invisible. Samantha looked at him for a moment, then reached into her bag and pulled out a sandwich, turkey and cheese on soft bread, wrapped in wax paper. She walked over and held it out. The man looked up, startled, eyes flicking between her face and the food. "Ma'am," he said, barely above a whisper. Samantha smiled gently. "Don't thank me," she said. "Just pay it forward." She turned before he could respond, walked back to Lena, and took her daughter's hand again. Together, they continued down the street, their shadows long in the morning light, stronger now, seen at last, and finally free.